Right, anyway, thank you all for making me feel so welcome. It's nice to be here. It's nice to be somewhere where it's warm and it's not raining. Where I live, it's very green, very beautiful, but we've had about 5 days of summer this year. So yeah, I've basically been doing this since forever. And you may wonder, why do we enjoy looking at this retro stuff? Shouldn't we all be facing forwards and doing modern stuff these days? But I think the point I want to try and make is that there's an awful lot of value in the retro stuff, which still applies to the modern day. So obviously I've been in the video game business a while, and I've done many significant things, obviously. I've done one thing which I've done more than any of you. Got old. And I've been stubborn. I started making games in 1978, and I really enjoyed making games. And when the video game business finally started to take off, what seemed to happen to a lot of the people who were making games is they went to management or running teams or something like that, and I never really enjoyed that. So I just carried on making my individual games. And often I was told, there's no place in the industry for somebody like you. It's all changed now. But somehow I managed to keep going. And one thing about it I can say is that working that way, it certainly wasn't the most lucrative way of working. There have been a couple of times I could have followed a different route and ended up living in Los Angeles and having lots of money and being an American arsehole. But I decided not to do that, and so I'm not as wealthy as I might be, but I can honestly say that I've never worked on anything in my life that I didn't love. And I think that's quite a privilege. So yeah, I'm very old. I'm not quite as old as this. This is I'm about the same age as video games, but I'm not quite as old as this one. This is Higginbotham's Tennis, and although it's a video game, it's not really what we would think of as a video game, because it runs on analog hardware. You can't copy it, and there's no code. So I'm not quite as old. I think that was 1959. I'm not quite that ancient. I think it was done on some kind of bomb aiming equipment or something, if I can remember, because some kind of analog integrator. Very clever, but not what we would perhaps call a video game. It's not made of code. Yes, this is actually a video game. I think everybody could recognise this. It's got two nerds playing it. It's running on a digital computer. They've got controllers. It's written in actual code. If you look at that picture, you can see there are two people playing video games dressed very weirdly, let's face it. But I guess that was the early 1960s. And I was looking at the development timeline of Space War, and it was began in January 1962. Release is perhaps exaggerating, because it was ran on a PDP-1, which I don't know how many $1 million that would have cost, but you couldn't exactly buy one in the shops and download a copy. But it was they released they had a public demonstration, which I thought will count as a release, because it was the first time the complete game was shown to an audience and people had a chance to actually play it. And that took place, you see there, on April 28th, 29th of 1962. So we can kind of say that maybe that's the dawn of video games right there, as video games as we know them. So if that was released on the 28th of April 1962, I was released on the 22nd of April 1962. Therefore, I'm 6 days older than video games. But video games, obviously I knew nothing about them for years and years and years. It was like 16 years later before I started to become aware of the things, really. I mean, I'd been into arcades when I was a kid, but it was all pinballs and electromechanical games. But 16 years later, you were starting to see things like Breakout and Space Invaders and Pong and that kind of stuff. You'd go to the sports centre to have a couple of machines there. And I liked them, of course. I was interested in them. I mean, there were new things. But there was no sense of them being anything which you could make. They were just things that existed. There was no kind of understandable path from, I see a video game here, what if I wanted to make one? So the thought just never crossed your mind back in those days. I mean, if you like music, you could think, I'll go out and buy a guitar and I'll learn to play and I'll get in a band. But back then, if you like video games, I had no clue how they worked. I mean, I didn't know anything about computers. They were just these things, these magical artifacts. They might as well have been made by wizards. There was no connection to anything which I personally could have ever thought I might get involved in. Computer education at school. I went to a school in Basingstoke. There were no computers in the school whatsoever. We still had lessons that were taught on these sorts of things. I mean, physical typewriter, actual hand-cranked calculators. I still remember sitting in a room, I had a room full of these things. No computers at all. I had no thought about computers. I didn't even think I would ever be interested in them. I wasn't the smartest kid in the school, but I wasn't the stupidest either. But I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I mean, I had kind of a foot in two camps. I was okay with maths and physics. I liked that. But then I also liked sort of creative stuff. I liked literature and creative writing, that sort of stuff. So I had a kind of one foot in the sciences and one foot in the arts, and I didn't really know which direction I wanted to go in. I was just bobbling up through the educational system, not really knowing where I was going to end up. And so, at school, I knew nothing about computers. I had no interest in them. It was nothing. I mean, this was my idea of computers, big mainframe iron in some office somewhere run by people from IBM with no beards, because I knew people from IBM weren't allowed to wear beards. Well, I don't know why that is, but basically boring, Send you your tax bill, that kind of thing. Yeah. And then I went to sixth form college. Sixth form college is what we have in the UK. It's between school and university. Basically, your last 2 years before you go to university, you go to a place called sixth form college, and you take your final round of exams there. And I was there one day, and I can't remember where I was going, but I went into the wrong room. And there was one of these down there, and I thought, what the hell is that thing? And there was a guy sat in front of it, and I went to go and see what he was doing. He was playing a game on it. What? This isn't one of those big arcade cabinets. How did that get in there? And he said you could type it in using a thing called BASIC. And I was like, what? You can just type and create your own game? And it was like, that sounds really interesting. I think I want to know a bit more about that. I went to the library and got a book about BASIC, just a generic book on BASIC. And my brother at the time had a TI-59 programmable calculator from his work, and he had a book of programs there, and I didn't know his calculator language, I didn't know BASIC, but I sat there with both books and kind of worked out a biorhythm program, I think it was, in BASIC. Went back into school early the next day, turned that thing on and started typing it in. Of course, it didn't work. But then the lad who'd been working on it, had been playing the game on it the previous day, he came in and started to show me what was wrong and teach me a bit. And it was the beginning of a learning process that went on for the next 2 years. It became absolutely all-consuming. It's like, I can be a wizard too. And so, there were 5 of us and 1 computer. And my parents didn't know what was going on because I was never that keen on going to school, and suddenly I was getting up early, riding my bicycle to school and getting there early, and then staying late. And they're like, what the hell is going on? Why are you so keen on something all of a sudden? It was good. There was 1 computer. If you were lucky, you could get half an hour of official time on it a day, and I needed more than half an hour a day because I was a junkie at that point. I wanted to spend every moment I could coding, and I did spend far too many moments coding. I mean, this is some of my first ever 6502 machine code, which I actually wrote, I think, during English class. I think they thought I was making notes, and I These were my notes. We started out by teaching ourselves basic, and of course that was too slow for doing games. So then I found out about this thing called machine code, and I managed to borrow a book of 6502 opcodes for a week, and I copied down all the opcodes and had that, and started to experiment in the Commodore PET. I remember the first time I ran my first ever machine code program. I wrote a loop in BASIC, which would just poke the character set to the screen, and then poke it again in reverse characters. And in BASIC, you could see it sort of doing it line by line like this. I wrote the same thing in machine code, and it was just strobing. It was like thousands of times faster. I was like, yeah, okay, we don't need BASIC anymore. And we made games for each other. Five guys in that room every day, and we would make games. We got into trouble at one point because we were writing high score tables on the wall. The teachers didn't like that. But, in 2 years we did fairly well. We learned how games work. We knew how to make them. We knew how to make them fast in machine code. And we started to get a feel of what was a successful game. We'd all make these games, and somebody's game would be more popular than the others, and you started to learn a little bit the leading edge of game design. But there was one problem with all this. There was nobody else around. There was no home computer industry at all at that time. I know in America they had the Commodore PET and they had the Apple II, but in the UK those machines were really expensive, and so nobody had those. So none of the kids at school had them. None of them knew what we were doing. All they knew was we were disappearing and doing something nerdy for hours a day. So we were just a handful of guys, and we developed these skills, and there was nowhere to use them. And as far as the arcade games and systems like Atari went, we knew how they worked, but we still couldn't see a route for us to get on there. I thought it might be quite nice then to get some qualifications in computing, being as I taught myself, and then go to university and learn more, but I couldn't get the qualifications at A level because they said, or even though I knew more than the teachers at that point, I was too late to start the course. Because I didn't get the A level exam, I couldn't get into university. So I ended up having to be completely self-taught because even though I desperately wanted to get into the educational system, I could not get in. It's very frustrating. And I think it's lovely now that there are actual university courses on video games. How perfect is that? It would have been lovely. So we had this shiny new skill set. We thought, it's just a nerdy skill set. It probably won't be useful at all in life, but hell yeah, we enjoyed it. It was a hobby. Then this man came along, and I remember being at home at my parents' place, and there was an article, a piece on the TV news, and it showed Uncle Clive demonstrating the ZX80 in a school somewhere, and they said this computer was going to cost £100, and I was like, oh, hello, because the Commodore PET was like £700, the Apple II was like £1,000, and the idea of getting one of these, I could actually save up I could do some work after college and earn enough money to buy one of these things. So I've got to get one of those. And it was a strange machine, weird little thing. 1K of memory, screen went off every time you touched the keyboard, screen went off when you did pretty much anything really. But it was cheap, and this was the most important thing. All the nerds like me bought one of those. It wasn't enough to really kickstart an industry, but it was, you could start to see something was beginning to change. It was a bit too weird for non-nerds, because you couldn't really have great video games. Well, people did get fantastic stuff out of the machine once they learned how to use it better, but back in the early days, there were not a lot of great games for the ZX80. But to me, as an addict, it was fantastic, because I could fill my boots every night with all the coding I wanted. And then he did it again. And this is where things really started to change, because this machine, even though it was basically the same machine with a few tweaks, it was slightly less weird, it was slightly cheaper, and it was just about good enough that you could start to see games that were recognisably video games on it. And at that point, the non-nerds started to be interested. And this is where things started to take off. In the space of a couple of years, you had meetings. It started with things like ZX microfairs, and then you had magazines coming out, and you had adverts for software. You had basically the nerds made things, and the non-nerds bought things. And this was amazing. This was amazing to see. There were magazines, there were exhibitions. It was the birth of a new industry. We'd been there in isolation 2 years earlier going, what are we going to do with all this? And suddenly all this stuff started to happen all around us. We're like, hey, actually, we've got a place here. We've got a party. And for a while it was a perfect time. I mean, the 8-bit era to me is one of the most fondly remembered times of my entire career, because it was before the big money really moved in, and it was a very creative time. I mean, once everybody learned that there's more to be done than just copying arcade games, and people started getting a bit crazy and sticking giant camels in things, then it was just fantastically creative, productive. You could bang out 5 or 6 games in a year. There were these wonderful shows you could go to where you could meet up with the people who played your games. You could meet up with all the other coders as well, because there wasn't a lot of fierce rivalry between us, really. We all got on. We were all down the bar at the end of the day, bending our elbow, And we went from being these guys who had this weird skill with no place to deploy it, we went to being almost like rock stars. It was fantastic. We even made a bit of money out of it. They were the perfect days. And it was too good to last, of course. So as soon as people realised there was serious money to be made in this stuff, then the industry transformed, and well, we know where it went. But I'm not really here to talk about that side of things. It was a long time ago. But these are some pictures from. Oh, look at that! Look at me there, Jew. I've still got this sheep. I've got some real ones now as well. But yeah, they were good days, and the exhibitions were great fun. So I really like seeing that there are still exhibitions that go on now, because to me they were part of the major pleasure of being in the business at that time, was going to these things and actually meeting the people who played the games. And I hardly ever had to buy my own beer. It was fantastic. So things have changed a lot. I mean, graphics have come on a bit, Driving games look a bit more realistic, handle a bit nicer now. Sports games, you can actually see what the players are now. You can see the numbers on their backs. The old versions were fun, but these days it's things have come on so much since then. I mean, I try and describe it to people. I say that back in the early days when if you compare the technology then, lines of basic plodding along one at a time, to the technology we've got now, shaders doing absolutely insane amounts of computation per pixel on massive screens. It's like the difference between an ox cart and a starship. So why is this old stuff still relevant? I mean, given that things are so fantastic now, should we not just be sort of warp 10 into the future? I mean, look at these space games. They're absolutely beautiful. But it's all connected. The whole thing is a chain. Everything that we see now that's so amazing was informed by a previous generation. It grew on the back of the stuff that came before it. And it's interesting to look at how that evolution took place, and it's also interesting to play these games, because although they may not look as amazing as current games do, in their time they were still fantastic games and well respected. And I think if you're at all interested in game design, particularly if you're thinking of going into actually doing it yourself, then it's important to look at this chain, to see how everything evolved, and to play these old games, because they're still fun. They may be old, but they're still fun. Designers had to work within constraints, which meant they had to place a lot of emphasis on the gameplay. Things weren't always better in the past, of course. You can see how things improved. You can see how people learned. But it's still very interesting to see what they managed to do within constraints. And they really had to focus on they couldn't just load everything with pretty graphics and amazing soundtracks. And they did astonishing things in the 8-bit era. I mean, look at this stuff. I mean, you had an entire universe in Elite. You had an open world within solar system. It was just extraordinarily clever stuff on 8-bit hardware. And this is one of my all-time favourites. I always bring this up. This is just fantastic. This is Atari Star Raiders. It was first-person space combat game. There's even a little bit of real-time strategy and resource management in it, a little bit. And it was in 8K. 8K, not 8 gigs, not 8 megs, 8K. It's tiny, and written in the 1970s. And it was one of my favourite games for years and years and years. And you could go back and play this now. I recommend you do, actually. Go back and play Star Raiders. Put it on a Star Commander version, the hardest version, and play it. It's a fantastic game, and it will make you sweat. Perfect little game. And it was the distilled essence of space games. And I think one of the things that's interesting about the stuff from the early days is how they had to work with the pure essence of gaming, because you couldn't have the resources you have now. And I'm kind of reminded of Picasso and his bull, where you have this illustration of the bull, and he strips it away and ends up with just the pure essence of bull. And back then, designers had to work the opposite way. You had to work with that pure essence. And it's difficult. I mean, it was difficult to make things good back then. There were a lot of wonky bulls. Most of us got it wrong, because genuine artistry is rare. And we were all learning. I mean, this is all brand new. Some of us had a 2-year head start, but it was all fantastically new. This stuff hadn't existed for very long, so there was an awful lot of bad games written back in the day, and some of them were mine. But everybody's been there. Everybody's ever been writing games. You always suck when you start. There's no two ways about it. So there's a lot of bad stuff there, but the stuff that's really good, not so much essence of ball, but the stuff that's really good is still really good to this day. And it's inspirational to look at that work and to learn from it. These are some of my favourites. Tempest, obviously, the original Tempest was a work of genius. Robotron, I think, is the absolute perfect essence of arcade game, probably the best arcade game ever. Eugene Jarvis is a particular hero of mine, and I think that's just the perfect game. Asteroids, of course, Ed Log, another classic. Working with almost nothing, just a few white lines, and it's still beautiful to this day to play. They're elegant and they're pure and they feel good. Everybody, of course, has their own favourites from back in that era. But if I was a teacher, one of the things I would say would be, if you want to understand what makes these games great, pick one and make your own version. There's a spaceship, there's some asteroids, it's easy to move around, there's an arena, there's some robots, you can shoot them, the rules are right there, dead easy to implement them. But then compare it and work out why yours sucks compared to theirs. Because the real artistry is in the fine details of how things move and what the acceleration is and how much firepower. It's tiny little adjustments like that. You can plonk down the basics of a video game very, very quickly. But I always try to do that when I'm designing a game, because I know that a lot of my time is going to be spent making tiny adjustments, just honing in on the way it feels. There's a feeling you develop as to what makes satisfying gameplay. And another difficult lesson is choose a classic game and make an improved version of it. It's bloody hard. These are cases where even the original designers have made so-called sequels to their games which haven't been as good as the original. I mean, it's nice, but it's not Defender. It's nice, but it's not Asteroids. It doesn't have that pure elegantness that the originals had. And I think it's important to study these early works. I say that they had to work with the pure essence, and when it shines through, it really does. And they're still enjoyable to play to this day. Good art is timeless. I think people will still be playing some of these games in 200 years. Why not? I mean, it's a bit like music, really. I mean, yes, you have modern music, you have pop music, but music stands the test of time. And I think the very best games, no matter what hardware they're made of, no matter what era they came from, will stand the test of time, because they will always be enjoyable to play. And studying how they're made will inform your own creativity when you're making games yourself. This picture breaks my heart, it really does. Look at that poor Robotron cab. So arcade games dead. I mean, most gaming these days tends to be a lot deeper than arcade games. So why study arcade games? And from the point of view of commercial AAA game design, there's not a lot of arcade games being made. And there are many skills that we need now which weren't so necessary in the arcade game era. You need proper music, 3D modelling, proper artwork, storytelling. So what's the point when there's a huge amount of depth in modern games? So why is it useful? And it's because what I was talking about earlier, it's about the feel of game design. It's visceral. And no matter how good your artwork or your soundtrack, no matter how deep your story, it doesn't matter if it doesn't feel nice to touch. There's a point of interface with your game where you're actually moving things around. That has to feel nice. And arcade games were all about that feeling in the absence of depth and resources. The thing that had you coming back was that they felt great to play. I mean, when you start really kicking ass in Robotron, it just feels wonderful. When you touch that lunar lander down with a big thrust lever on the most difficult landing pad, it feels fantastic. And so you want to have that same kind of feeling in whatever you're doing these days. If you're doing modern games, you still want to inform them with that same kind of feeling. You want them to be just as nice to touch and use. And you can learn this from playing these old arcade games, because that was all they basically had. So play them and make them. You learn a lot. Another nice thing about arcade games is that they make for nice, short projects. You can get on something like Pico 8 or whatever and bang out arcade games really quickly. And every time you do, you learn. It's fun. There's some Pico 8 stuff here. Somebody even made a Pico 8 version of Grid Runner, look, which was nice. And a lot of making a game these days is hard slog. I mean, sometimes you can be spending a year and a half working on a project or even more. Just making some games that you can do in a few weeks is just fun to do. And sometimes I make games as a break from making games. If you see what I mean. I made a version of Hover Bobber on Scramble hardware last year, just for the hell of it, in weekends, and that was quite fun. Short projects, they're fun. And also, releasing a game is a valuable skill. I know so many people who've got like a drawer full of unfinished projects. And then they wonder why they start things and they start to lose enthusiasm. And the thing is, when you complete a game, it boosts your confidence. You know that you can do it. Part of the difficult thing, I think, of game design is that you will inevitably get to a point where you feel that things aren't working, and you think, oh God, I'm never going to get through this. And the end seems so far away, and it's very easy to give up at that point. But if you've been through that, and you've pushed through, and you've completed a game and released it, then you know you can do that. And when that happens again, you can then trust yourself. So you just say, all right, just don't panic, carry on, push through, you'll get there. And I've had to do that so often in my career. But completing and releasing is a valuable skill. So even if it's just a tiny game, even if it's just for your mates, do that as often as you can. And it's fun to work within constraints as well. I mean, you may not be the best artist in the world. It doesn't matter if you work within constraints. You can do what the old designers did and just concentrate on the artwork. It doesn't matter concentrate on the gameplay. It doesn't matter if the artwork is programmer art. I mean, it's fine. And it's an interesting challenge. So, that's why people still like to work on games like machines like the MSX or do ports to old consoles these days, because it's fun. So the more games you make, the more you will develop that feeling of what feels good to touch in a game, and that feeling will inform everything you make. Whether it's arcade games or your modern work, it's a valuable thing that will always be with you. And do your homework. Get one of these things. Install MAME. Get one of these things. These things are absolutely fantastic. They are cheap as chips, and you can have pretty much the entire 8 and 16-bit history in the palm of your hand in a Super Game Boy. Fantastic. I'd never travel anywhere without one of those. And you can just play them, you can study them, be analytical, look at them, be judgmental. When one sucks, say it sucks and work out why it sucks. When one is brilliant, try and understand why it's brilliant. Emulation is fantastic. I know some people don't like it, but I think emulation is amazing. I'm very glad that it's there. It's not quite the same as playing on original hardware, but it keeps these things alive. And it's a very useful tool for everybody studying. I mean, not everybody's got a room full of old machines to play on, so sometimes an emulator is what you need. But yeah, get one of these things. And I kind of have to mention this. In some ways, this is kind of embarrassing, because there's a lot of my early work on there, and you will see that a lot of my early work is rough as a badger's arse, as we say in the UK. It's early. And there's stuff that's primitive, there's stuff that's maybe too experimental, where I tried a bit too hard to be different, and it didn't really work. But it's nice. It's nice if you want to look at that era of history. It comes with a lot of background information, adverts from the time, and that kind of stuff. But of course, I'm not here to plug this. You can, of course, play all these games on emulators without having to buy anything, and I'd hope you will do that. They're all available on the internet, and these are the emulators that I use for them. Steam, Vice, Altera, the Big PMU, if you've got any interest in Jaguar, Big PMU is fantastic. And I think that's about time for me to finish off now. Thank you very much for having me. I hope I haven't bored you too much with my little trip down memory lane. But yeah, study our history, learn from our history, enjoy our history, it's fantastic. Be inspired, make games, and most of all, enjoy yourself, have fun, that's what it's all about. Thank you.
So, thank you very much, Jeff. That was really interesting. So, si teniu alguna pregunta o voleu fer un comentari, tenim molt de temps.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
No, I'm just turning off my shit, that's all. But no. So, any questions?
Okay. One of the projects you worked before was for Nintendo GameCube.
Yes.
What happened with this project, and is there any data recovered from that project? Is there any remains from that project that could be recovered?
Well, I don't really have any of the source code for that anymore, but what happened was, it was an idea for a game which I had. Peter Molyneux was running Lionhead at the time and was interested in having me make this game. So I went to talk to him about it and explained the idea, and he said, okay, let's make this game. So he funded me for it. The thing is, basically, I was a bit too ambitious in my game design. There was still only me at that point making games. I was doing it all on my own, and this was quite an ambitious design. I wanted to have like a genetic evolution algorithm. What the idea was to create a game where everybody bought the same game, but as each person played the game, it would evolve, so each person would eventually end up with kind of a unique game tailored to their own gameplay habits. And it was just too much. It was taking too long, basically. I made some good progress. I made some nice stuff. But really, by the time I'd been working on it for 2 years and it still wasn't finished, and it was on the GameCube, if we'd carried on doing it, then the GameCube would have been end of life at that point, and they decided there was just no real point to carry it on, so it got canned, unfortunately. But having said that, one of the things I made for it was a dynamic texture generation thing, which turned into a 4-user light synthesizer, which then became the visualizer in the Xbox 360. So some of it got out that way. And some of the other ideas I've had for it have informed game designs that I've gone on to do later on, like Space Giraffe, things. Some ideas that I had for that game have gone into things like Space Giraffe. So I don't consider it to be wasted time. I mean, it was a learning experience. It's one of the few occasions where I started making something and didn't actually finish it. But I would say that I developed skills doing that, and the technology has helped me in other ways in other projects, really.
Mr. Minter, you used the metaphor of a band. You were considering either playing, learning how to do video games, or maybe playing in a band. No, that was the easy way to be creative at that time. But at the end, you ended up creating video game mostly alone. So how would have been Jeff Minter inside a band creating video games as a collective, as something that with idea cross-pollinating each other? How would be?
Yeah, I don't know. I've never really been that much of a team player when it comes to game design. I don't know why that is. It's kind of very personal to me, and I almost feel like having working with somebody else, we'd be like treading on each other's toes somehow. I mean, LlamaSoft has doubled in size now. We are actually 2 guys now instead of 1. But then I do most of the creative stuff, and Ivan does all the engine stuff. In fact, I always say he builds the horse and I get to ride it. No, I mean I have worked with other people, of course. I mean, Tempest 2000, I think, is a prime example of that. Tempest 2000 would be half the game without the fantastic music in it. But I literally didn't have to work with them day to day. I literally sent them a copy of the game, said this is what I'm doing so far, and they sent back a tape two weeks later saying this is what we're doing, and I say that's fantastic. No, I've never really tried it. There is an outside possibility I may actually be going to do a collaboration with somebody in the not too distant future. There's a certain gentleman I'm going to be visiting in America when I go there in September. I can't really say who it is yet, but it would be fantastic if that comes off, put it that way. So yeah, I wouldn't rule it out, but it's just been my particular style, perhaps because nobody quite likes camels as much as I do. It's just been my particular style to work on my own, really. It's not been anything I've done out of dislike for working with other people. It's just, this is what feels right to me.
Hi, thank you for the speech. Which video game was the hardest for you to program, and why? And second question too, which system did you like most to program on?
Okay, probably the hardest one to code would have been Tempest 3000 or the Nuon, because the Nuon was a very, very weird architecture. It was at a time when hardly anybody was doing parallel stuff, and it was parallel. It was parallel on multiple different levels. You had parallelism in the actual instructions, in that you could have obviously multiple instructions, multiple data for a single instruction. So you had like vector operations. You also had a VLIW architecture, so you had basically you had to pack each instruction. Each individual instruction had could have up to 7 different sub instructions. And so you had to learn how, when you were coding in a loop, how maximally, optimally to pack these things. We didn't have a tool to do this for us. There was a simple tool, but it was very ineffective. If you wanted to do this properly, you had to do it yourself. You could spend like a weekend puzzling down a 10-tick in a loop to an 8-tick in a loop and packing each instruction very densely. And that was very satisfying and rewarding to do. But in an era when most people just wanted to bang out a bit of C, and get fantastic performance, it perhaps wasn't the best. Also, it was an array of processes. It wasn't just a single processor. So effectively, we were doing the graphics code in the same way that shaders do them now, by dividing up the screen into small chunks. Also, each CPU only had like 4K of memory each. I think one had 16K, all the others had 4K. And so you had to DMA your chunk of memory in, and then operate on it as efficiently as you could, and then DMA it out again. You had to synchronize this between all the different CPUs. Sometimes you'd leave a test running and get back into the office the following day and see like half my processors have crashed. Kind of work that one out. So yeah, you could get fantastic performance. You could get like shader-like performance, almost shader-like performance, out of a sort of 40, 50 megahertz chip using these techniques. but it was fantastically difficult to program. There were probably only about 5 or 6 of us who actually could make the thing work to its full capacity, which was one of the reasons that it never really took off. And it's also probably the answer to your second question as well, because that made it so challenging and so as a nerd, it was fantastic fun to program on it. To make this thing sing and dance was very satisfying. I mean, obviously, modern hardware is fantastic. It's like modern shaders are like voodoo. The sheer amount of stuff they will do is astonishing. Well, yeah, you'll never get around that. But I've got a very soft spot for the new one because it was just so much fun in a nerdy way.
Hello. I'm also, as a lot of people here, we're also very fans of your music visualizer work. I think the 360, the new one, is amazing, and I was very intrigued to ask, like, in the documentary, there's a moment where it seems like it was being played with a Kinect or some kind of virtual reality device. And yeah, I was wondering, like, have you toyed with the idea of, a music visualizer in virtual reality or something of the sorts?
Actually, we had a version of VLM4 running on the what's the name of the bloody headset? It's gone out of my head now. The Meta thing. The Oculus. We had a version of that running back in 2020, start of 2020, and it's fascinating because the difference between a light synth and a visualizer is that a visualizer is automatic. The light synths are performed by people. You actually do the actions which create the graphics, and when you start putting the control into virtual reality. And obviously it's fantastic because all this stuff is happening all around you. But also, you're navigating the parameter space it's almost like dancing. And so it feels absolutely fantastic. So you can imagine like 4 guys dancing around my living room wearing Meta Quest headsets going like this. And I didn't get a chance to finish that off because I'd had to do some other work for Atari. But we are still planning to do that. I've been working on a new light synth core because we've been using the Neon core for ages, and it needed updating to modern hardware. And I've got a new light synth core which is fantastic. It's easily the best light synth core I've ever made. And we will be making a new light synth, and it will be in VR, and it's going to be excellent. So yeah, we are fully on that.
Most of your works can be defined as a combination of visual and sound experience with gameplay. Did you have any inspiration to arrive to that definition or to that software you created?
I guess it goes back to what first inspired the light synth to me, which was when I was like 11 years old. I used to listen to Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd. And I'd lie in my bedroom at night with the lights turned off and just listening to some of the tracks on there. There was a track in particular called On the Run with this driving sort of filter sweep synth going on. And I would visualise these sort of abstract things in my head to go along with the music. And I thought, I wish one day there would be a machine which would let you put those kind of things on a screen and get them out and show them to people. And that was the impetus which always made me want to create the light synth. And once I started doing a bit of light synth work, I did psychedelia and colour space and triptych and stuff like that. There was a point where it all started to come together, and that, of course, was Tempest 2000, because the game itself was very abstract, so it seemed very natural to start throwing in some of these light synth style effects on it. And I realised at that point that I probably wanted that kind of fusion to be in everything I do moving forward. I like a game to be obviously fun to play, but also entertaining and hypnotic to look at. So yeah, that's informed everything I've ever done since then, really.
And have you ever received any review that you has been the inspiration of this design of this experience? For example, Tetsuya Mizoguchi with Red or similars?
Well, I think probably one of the highest accolades I've ever been paid was the fact that Trent Reznor out of 9 Inch Nails had me do a music video for him using Polybius. So I couldn't quite believe it when the phone went and it was bloody Trent Reznor. I'm like, what? But the thing is, I'd seen somebody with the name Trent Reznor following me on Twitter for years, and his avatar was a Robotron, robot. And I thought that's probably not the real Trent Reznor, but he likes Robotron. Can't be. It turns out it was the real Trent Reznor, and he really likes those kind of games. So yeah, I was absolutely chuffed to be doing that. It was fantastic.
How was working with Trent Reznor?
It was excellent, excellent. The man's a complete gentleman. It was really fun to work with him. The work went absolutely smoothly, and they paid us nicely. It was also one of the things that really shows the quality of the man, I think, is that he actually arranged for the YouTube, for the thumbnail of the video on YouTube. Basically, it says LlamaSoft. So like a LlamaSoft advert right there in the front of a 9 Inch Nails video. Like, okay, thank you, Trent.
Any question?
I'm the moderator, but then I can also ask questions since I have you here. And you, later I give it to you. So well, you said if you were a teacher, no, you would ask students, no, to choose a classic, and then first, do your version, make your own version, and then let's try to improve it, no. So for you, which classic would be your starting point, no, the first one you would say to students? There are lots, no, but that's.
I would say
that's a question.
But I mean, if you want to start with something that's deceptively simple, I would say. I mean, choose asteroids, because it's so simple. You just plonk down some asteroids, there's a spaceship, fire some bullets, break the asteroids up, there's not much to it. But so much of that game is in the balance. I've seen so many versions of asteroids over the years that, not quite where the ship doesn't handle quite right, or the rocks don't break up right, or the fire rate is wrong. There are so many ways you can get it wrong. So I think that would be an excellent illustration, because I mean, you could bang out the code to make it in a day or two, but then to polish it up and make it feel like real asteroids would take probably a couple of weeks,
Yeah, I mean that it's like you say, the details. No, it's very simple, but the way the asteroids break might absolutely change the experience. No, if it doesn't feel right. No, as you say, it's visceral.
I remember like back in the day, there were loads of versions of Space Invaders. I was guilty. I did this myself, and you would see that they would always move the bank of invaders like all together, chunk, 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 no matter how many there were left. And if you look at the original arcade game, it doesn't do that. It moves them one at a time. And as the load on the CPU gets less and less, they get faster and faster. And that's one of the defining characteristics of Space Invaders that give it its feel. And every single person who made these Space Invader clones missed it.
Okay. So, well, next semester when my students complain, I will tell Jeff Minter told me to do it. So I don't know.
Just a quick question, most about hardware in this case, because you seem to have some kind of predilection for smaller systems, weird systems maybe, the Jaguar, the Nuon, even the PS Vita if you want. But is there any kind of, is your source of motivation to find these smaller systems with specific things that you must learn how to program for them?
I think I've always just liked working on sort of cutting-edge hardware, new hardware, prototype hardware, stuff that hasn't come out. It's like catnip to me. If somebody says, I've got this new system which is interesting, it may not be the most commercially viable thing, but it's interesting, I'll probably go and write some stuff on it. I mean, when I went to do the work with Nuon, I had an opportunity then I could have gone to join Activision. Activision wanted me. I could have gone and worked with my friends on this weird thing which may not go anywhere called Nuon, and well, you know where I went. I just like prototypes. I like playing with new stuff. I mean, when we did Polybius on the PS4, we had some of the earliest prototypes of the PlayStation VR hardware to play with, and even had a bit of input into some of the design. We'd talk to the designers every time I went down to London to see them. So yeah, I just like being involved in new and interesting stuff. it's more important to me probably than being involved with stuff that's majorly commercial, I suppose.
Arcade video games put the focus more often on the score, not this number to achieve as much as possible. Maybe compete with your friends, and many of your titles also take again this aspect. While modern video games are more focused on storytelling.
Yeah.
So, in case you have the opportunity to reinterpret one of your, I don't want to use intellectual property, but your character in a more storytelling way, which one would you like to pick?
I think probably the most interesting one would be something like Ancipital, because he's an interesting little character, and he's something that I haven't worked with recently. Actually, one of these days I must do some more work with that character because it's absolutely one of my favourites. I mean, I can't really say mutant camels because we. But yeah, I think Ancipital would be. I mean, if I was doing British comedy, it would be like Gordon Bennett out of Hoverbot, you know.
So looking forward for Netflix to approach you to write a TV series show about one of your characters. Hope so.
Well, there was actually a couple of years ago, some guy was actually interested in doing some kind of film involving Hoverbother, but it never came out.
Last question, sorry. As a developer, you usually create games just for a project to get money, of course. But as a player or as a developer for leisure, for enjoying, what's the platform you enjoy the most?
You
You won't say MSX, I know.
No, I do like the MSX platform. I did have one back in the day. It just never really took off in the UK. We were all too busy with our Commodores and Sinclairs, and it's a shame because there's some great stuff on the MSX, and it's quite nice to come out here and see that it was so successful over here. But as to what these days I play most of my games on PS5 and PC. If I'm playing retro, I'm very fond of the PC Engine. PC Engine's a lovely system. Got some lovely shoot 'em ups on there. I had a PC Engine CD-ROM back in the day, so yeah, I love that. I love that little system, and I like going through some of the more obscure systems that I didn't have. I mean, often in emulation because I haven't got room for all the hardware. But yeah, I have been going through the MSX back catalogue and finding gems there which I might have missed back in the day. Another thing which I play a lot at the moment, we got a couple of months ago, we got a virtual pinball table. And I love pinball, and it's lovely how it's about like 7/8 of full size, and it's got like 70 or 80 different tables on it, and it's great. It makes for a lovely break from coding because you can just have a 5-minute game of pinball and then go back to this. And so it's interesting studying a bit about pinball early game design as well by playing the old tables on there.
No more questions? Que hago otra, ¿eh?
Yeah, I was wondering, since LlamaSoft games are so synonymous with their, rave music, especially after Tempest 2000, I was wondering what kind of music do you listen when you're coding?
Yeah, I tend to listen to definitely electronic rave style music when I'm coding because you don't want anything that's particularly sort of intellectually engaging because you don't want to be listening to lyrics that might distract you from coding. And I like electronic dance music because it's got a nice high energy, keeps you up, but doesn't destroy your focus on code. So when I'm working hard on code, I tend to really crank it out. Underworld is a particular favourite of mine. I'm banging that out all the time.
Do you have a favorite DJ or producer? I know rhythm has a lot of history in rave music, so.
Yeah, I would say I love Underworld and obviously Chemical Brothers and things like that. They're okay. I'm trying to think of the name. My favourite DJ now. It's completely flown out of my head because I was not expecting to be asked that question about that. But yeah, Underworld are my absolute favourites. I actually saw them last weekend. Underworld were playing last weekend, actually. When I grew up on the edge of this big forest called Wasing Woods, and it was attached to a manor house. But all the kids from the local estate used to go through the fence and play in this forest, much to the chagrin of the people in the manor house. But yeah, as far as we were concerned, that was our forest, and I hadn't been there for years. And I found out earlier on this year that Underworld were going to be playing in that forest. So I had to go back and see them, and it was fantastic. They were really good.
One question. You've been developing games for a long time, so you've been a programmer for many different systems. Usually in the past, computers were more limited, so you had to push the limits through code. But right now, maybe it's easier and code is less,
Yeah.
So, do you enjoy more working on older systems with bigger limitations, or do you enjoy more right now, maybe coding is easier?
Yeah, I mean, coding is definitely easier. It's easy to get into. I mean, there are solutions these days. You can operate things like Unreal 5 almost without writing any code. They've got these diagrams with wires on and stuff. Not anything I do, but whatever works for you, works for you. But there's still an area of coding which is fantastically fun, and that's shader coding, because it's highly parallel, it's really interesting, and you can get some fantastic stuff. It's just mind-breakingly fast. It just does an absolutely huge amount of computation very, very quickly. So that's very interesting to play with. But I do like the fact that game design now is accessible from all kinds of different directions. You don't have to be a fantastic coder to get into it. Anybody who studies game design and wants to get into it, various different ways to get into it without having to be super duper at code anymore. I mean, it was a bit exclusive back in the day because you had to be a nerd. Now you don't have to be a nerd. You just have to be interested.
Hello, Jeff. My friend has a question for you. Do you think that Winamp has a great sound in the application?
Winamp, yeah. I mean, you know that I am the reason for that llama, because when they released Winamp, I was at a computer exhibition in the US at the time, and one of the guys from Winamp came up to me. The Jaguar VLM had come out. And one of the guys from Winamp came up to me, wearing a jacket with the llama on the back. And he says, I hope you don't mind that we stole half your algorithms for our visualizer. And I said, no, I don't particularly mind. And can I have one of the jackets? So they wouldn't give me the bloody jacket. And they've put that llama in every single version of Winamp ever since, and they didn't even give me a bloody llama jacket. But no, I am the reason that the llama's arse is being kicked. It's because they figured their visualizer was better than mine. John Digweed, that's all I wanted to remember, the name of my favourite DJ. Okay. John Digweed is fantastic. If you've not heard any of his stuff, dig it out.
Okay. Well, I wouldn't say one more. It's not a question, it's more like a comment, but something that I enjoy. You said lots of interesting things, no? But something that resonated with me is when you said, when I'm tired of programming, I program more games to have fun, no? Like, yes. No? Because personally, lately, I have grown fond of programming games, no? Yeah. So like after spending all my day programming, now I start a video game which is about making programs, no? But in this intellectual effort, no? Like trying to solve a difficult problem, no? So that was something very interesting, no? So well, since there are no more comments, but nevertheless, Jeff will be around here, so you can talk with him if you want. We close this question and answer turn and this presentation, so I think that we can thank him because it has been a very interesting program.
Thank you.
And thank you for being here.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.